My brother made me best man, then replaced me a week before his wedding. I still showed up. They sat me at a table in the corner with people I'd never met. I watched his friend give the speech I was supposed to give. I left before the cake. He texted me 3 words the next morning. My name's Harrison, I'm 32, and I need to tell you about the worst wedding I've ever attended. Which is saying something, because I once went to a ceremony where the groom's ex showed up in a white dress and the flower girl bit the officiant. But at least at that wedding, I had a seat at a table where someone knew my name. Let me back up. My brother Cole is 3 years younger than me. Growing up, we were close. Not in that made-for-TV, tossing the football in the backyard kind of way, but close in the way that matters. I was the one who taught him to ride a bike. I was the one who sat outside the principal's office with him when he got suspended in 8th grade for telling his history teacher that the Civil War was basically just a really long HOA dispute. I was the one who drove 45 minutes at 2 in the morning to pick him up from a party when he was 16 because he was too scared to call our parents. We had good parents, don't get me wrong. Mom and Dad were solid. But there was always this unspoken dynamic in our house where Cole was the golden child and I was the bronze child. Not neglected, just slightly less shiny. Cole was the one who got straight A's without trying, who made varsity baseball as a sophomore, who had the kind of easy charisma that made teachers and neighbors and random strangers at the grocery store just gravitate toward him. I was more of an acquired taste. Quiet, a little awkward, good at math, which as we all know is the personality trait that gets you invited to exactly 0 parties. But I never resented Cole for it. That's the thing people don't understand. I love my brother. I was proud of him. When he graduated from college, I drove 6 hours to be there. When he got his first big promotion at this marketing firm downtown, I took him out to dinner and paid for the whole thing even though I was barely scraping by at the time. When he told me he was dating this woman named Sutton, I was genuinely happy for him. She seemed great. Smart, funny, worked in nonprofit fundraising, had this laugh that could fill a room. I thought, good for him. He found his person. They dated for about 2 years before Cole proposed. He called me the night it happened, and I swear his voice was shaking. Harrison, she said yes, man. She said yes. And I told him congratulations, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. Then he said the words that, looking back, were the beginning of the end. I want you to be my best man. There's nobody else I'd even consider. I'm not going to lie, I got a little choked up. We were 29 and 32 at that point, and life had done what life does. We didn't hang out as much. He had his world, I had mine. But hearing him say that made me feel like we were kids again, like none of the distance mattered. I said yes immediately. Didn't even hesitate. For the next 8 months, I threw myself into it. I'm talking full commitment. I helped him pick out the venue, this gorgeous converted barn about an hour outside the city. I organized the bachelor party, which involved renting a cabin near a lake and convincing 8 guys with varying levels of outdoor skills to go kayaking, which went about as well as you'd expect. I started working on my speech in month 2. I know that sounds early, but here's the thing about me. I'm not a natural public speaker. I'm the guy who rehearses ordering coffee in his head before he gets to the register. So I knew the speech had to be perfect, and the only way it was going to be perfect was if I started early and revised it about 47 times. I wrote that speech like it was my thesis. I went through old photos. I called up childhood friends for stories. I even reached out to one of Cole's college roommates, this guy named Fletcher, to get some good anecdotes from when I wasn't around. The speech was funny, it was heartfelt, it had a callback to this inside joke Cole and I had about a raccoon that broke into our garage when we were kids. It was, and I say this with full confidence, the best thing I'd ever written. And I'd written a lot of mediocre things. Here's where things started to shift. About 3 months before the wedding, Cole started hanging out more with this guy named Prescott. Prescott was one of his co-workers at the marketing firm. I'd met him once at a barbecue, and my read on him was that he was the kind of guy who called everyone bro and thought being loud was a personality. But Cole seemed to like him, and who was I to judge? I once had a friend in college whose main hobby was ranking gas stations by bathroom cleanliness, so I wasn't exactly operating from a position of social authority. At first it was subtle. Cole would mention Prescott more in conversation. Prescott and I went golfing. Prescott knows this great steakhouse. Prescott thinks the venue should have a cigar bar. That last one annoyed me a little because we'd already finalized the venue plan, but I let it go. Then I started getting fewer texts about wedding stuff. Decisions were being made without me. The seating chart, the playlist, even the groomsmen's ties. I'd find out about changes after the fact, usually through our group chat, which Prescott had been added to without anyone asking me. I told myself I was overthinking it. Cole was stressed, weddings are chaotic, and maybe Prescott was just being helpful. I was still the best man. My name was still on the program. That's what mattered. Then, exactly 8 days before the wedding, Cole called me. It wasn't a long call. He didn't ease into it. He just said it like he was reading it off a card, which, knowing Cole, he probably was. "Hey, Harrison, so Sutton and I have been talking, and we've decided to make some changes to the wedding party. We're going to have Prescott step into the best man role. It's nothing personal. He's just been more involved lately, and Sutton thinks it'll flow better for the ceremony." I didn't say anything for about 10 seconds. I know because I was staring at the microwave clock the entire time. "Harrison, you there?" "Yeah," I said. "I'm here. You're still a groomsman, obviously. Nothing else changes. We just think this makes more sense." I wanted to ask him what part of replacing your own brother as best man 8 days before the wedding makes more sense. I wanted to ask him if Prescott had written a speech that referenced the raccoon in the garage. I wanted to ask him if Sutton, who I had been nothing but kind to for 2 straight years, had actually said that, or if he was hiding behind her name because he didn't have the spine to own the decision. But I didn't ask any of that, because I'm Harrison, and Harrison doesn't make scenes. Harrison says, "Okay," and hangs up and sits in his apartment staring at a wall for 45 minutes wondering what he did wrong. So that's exactly what I did. The week between that phone call and the wedding was one of the longest of my life. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, looking for clues. Had I missed something? Had I done something wrong at the bachelor party? Was there a moment where Cole looked at me and thought, "You know what? This guy isn't up to it"? I went through our text history like a detective reviewing case files. Everything seemed normal, right up until it wasn't. I called my mom the next day, not to complain, just to see if she knew. She did, and that's what really stung. She already knew. "Oh, sweetie, Cole mentioned it," she said, like he'd told her he was switching caterers. "I think Prescott's just been such a big help with everything. It's nothing against you. It's nothing against me," I repeated, and I could hear how flat my voice sounded. "Don't make this into a thing, Harrison. It's Cole's wedding. Let him have it the way he wants." And there it was, the family motto, printed on the invisible crest that had hung over our house my entire life. Let Cole have it the way he wants. Let Cole pick the restaurant. Let Cole have the bigger room. Let Cole take credit for the thing you helped him build. Don't make it a thing, Harrison. Don't be difficult. I wasn't going to make it a thing. I showed up to the rehearsal dinner 2 nights before the wedding in a suit I'd bought specifically for the occasion. I shook hands. I smiled. I told Sutton she looked beautiful, which she did. I even shook Prescott's hand, and when he said, "No hard feelings, right, bro?" I said, "Of course not," which is the most heroic lie I've ever told, and I once told my dentist I floss every day. The rehearsal dinner was at this upscale Italian place downtown. Long table, candles, wine flowing. I was seated about halfway down, between my Aunt Glenda, who spent most of the evening describing her knee surgery in medical-grade detail, and Sutton's cousin Rowan, who was perfectly nice, but clearly had no idea who I was or why I looked like I was attending my own funeral. Cole gave a little toast at the dinner. He thanked everyone for being there, thanked his parents, thanked Sutton's parents, thanked the bridal party by name. He thanked Prescott specifically. "This guy has been my rock through this whole process," he said, raising his glass in Prescott's direction. "Couldn't have done it without you, man." He did not mention me. Not once. Not even in passing. I was his brother, his former best man, and I had become furniture. I sat there with my fork halfway to my mouth and realized something that I'd been avoiding for a long time. This wasn't about the wedding. This was about everything. This was about every time I'd been quietly shuffled to the side so Cole could have his moment. Every time I'd bitten my tongue. Every time I told myself it didn't matter because that's just how families work. It all mattered. It had always mattered. I'd just been too loyal, or maybe too afraid, to admit it. The wedding day arrived, and I showed up because I said I would. I'm a lot of things, but I'm not a flake. I put on my groomsman's suit, which was slightly different from the best man's suit because of course it was, and I drove to the barn venue with my stomach in knots and a speech I'd never give folded up in my inside pocket. I don't know why I brought it. Sentimental stupidity, probably. The ceremony was beautiful. I'll give them that. The barn looked incredible, all string lights and wildflowers, and that warm amber glow that makes everything look like a movie. Sutton walked down the aisle, and Cole started crying. And for about 30 seconds I forgot I was angry and just felt happy for my little brother. Then the feeling passed, and I went back to standing in line like a very well-dressed mannequin. After the ceremony, we moved to the reception area, and this is where it got truly, spectacularly insulting. I was not seated with the wedding party. I was not seated with my family. I was not seated anywhere near the front. I was at table 14, which was in the far corner of the reception hall, partially obscured by a support column next to the door to the kitchen. My table mates were Sutton's co-worker's boyfriend, an elderly couple I'd never seen before who turned out to be the caterer's parents, and a woman named Delphine who had apparently been Sutton's college roommate's mother's neighbor. I am not making that up. I sat down and stared at my place card. Harrison. Not Harrison, brother of the groom. Just Harrison. Like I was some random acquaintance they'd added to hit a head count. The reception moved along the way receptions do. Dinner, dancing, toasts. And then came the moment I'd been dreading. Prescott stood up, tapped his glass, and started giving the best man speech. My replacement best man speech. It was fine. It was generic. He told a story about Cole at work that involved a printer jam and a missed deadline, which is the kind of anecdote that makes you realize the guy has known the groom for about 14 months. He made a joke about marriage being like a group project where you actually like your partner. People laughed politely. Sutton smiled. Cole grinned and clapped Prescott on the shoulder. I sat at table 14 behind the column and listened to a speech that had none of the history, none of the heart, and none of the raccoon in the garage. And I felt something crack inside me. Not dramatically, not loudly. Just a quiet fracture, like a branch giving way under snow. After the speech, my mom came over. I thought maybe she was going to check on me. Maybe she'd seen my face during Prescott's toast and realized this had gone too far. Instead, she said, "Wasn't that a lovely speech? Prescott's such a natural." I looked at her and said, "Yeah, he's great." She patted my arm and walked away. I lasted through about another hour. I watched people dance. I watched Cole and Sutton do their first dance to some song I didn't recognize. I watched Prescott lead a toast with the groomsmen that I was technically part of, but nobody came to get me for. I watched my dad tell a story to a group of guests about Cole's baseball days, the same story he'd told 100 times, and I noticed he never mentioned that I was the one who drove Cole to every practice that year because Dad was working late. At 9:45, before they cut the cake, I stood up from table 14, put my napkin on my chair, and walked out. I didn't say goodbye to anyone. I didn't cause a scene. I just left, walked through the kitchen door since it was right there, past two confused servers, and out into the parking lot. The air was cool, and it smelled like pine trees. I sat in my car for a while. I pulled the speech out of my jacket pocket and read it one more time under the dome light. It was good. It was really good. And nobody was ever going to hear it. I drove home, hung up my suit, and sat on my couch in the dark. The next morning, at 7:14, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Cole. 3 words. "You left early." Not "where did you go?" Not "are you okay?" Not "I'm sorry." Just "you left early." A statement. An observation. Like I ducked out of a work meeting and he was marking attendance. I stared at those 3 words for a long time. Then I put my phone down and didn't respond. The weeks after the wedding were rough. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I didn't fall apart in some dramatic, made-for-television way. I just kind of dimmed, like someone had turned down the brightness on my whole life by about 40%. I went to work. I came home. I ate dinner standing over the kitchen counter because sitting at the table felt like too much commitment to the evening. I stopped calling my parents. Not out of spite, at least not consciously. I just didn't have the energy to perform the role of the easygoing son who doesn't let things bother him. I'd been performing that role for 32 years, and my contract had expired. Cole texted me a few more times in the 2 weeks after the wedding. "Hope you're doing good. Mom says you haven't called. And my personal favorite, Sutton wants to do a family dinner soon, you in?" As if everything was fine. As if I hadn't been exiled to the shadow realm at his own wedding and left before dessert. The sheer obliviousness of it would have been impressive if it weren't so painful. I didn't respond to any of them. Not because I was playing some strategic game of silence. I genuinely didn't know what to say. What was I supposed to write back? "Hey, thanks for demoting me as best man, seating me behind a pillar with the caterer's in-laws, and then texting me like I'm a casual acquaintance you bumped into at the gym." The English language doesn't have enough words for that level of disappointment. And I say that as someone who scored in the 98th percentile on the verbal section of the SAT, which, for the record, has never once been useful in real life. About a month after the wedding, my friend Alara called me. Alara and I had been friends since freshman year of college. She's the kind of person who will tell you your haircut looks terrible and then drive you to the barber herself. Zero tolerance for nonsense, but the biggest heart you've ever seen. She could tell something was wrong immediately. "You sound like a deflated balloon," she said. "What happened?" Not "what happened?" with a question mark. Just "what happened?" like she already knew there was a story and she was simply opening the door for it. So I told her. Everything. The demotion, the rehearsal dinner, table 14, the speech I never gave, the 3-word text. All of it. When I finished there was a long pause, and then she said, "Harrison, I love you, but you have got to stop letting people treat you like a side character in your own life." That hit me harder than I expected. "I'm coming over Saturday," she said. "We're going to eat something that isn't microwave burritos, and you're going to tell me what you actually want to do about this." Alara showed up that Saturday with Thai food and a level of directness that should probably be classified as a weapon. We sat on my living room floor because I still hadn't replaced the dining chairs that broke during a poorly conceived furniture assembly attempt, and she laid it out for me. "You have 2 options," she said, pointing a spring roll at me like a tiny edible sword. "Option 1. You keep being the nice guy who absorbs everything and slowly resents everyone until you're 65 and bitter. Option 2. You start building a life that doesn't revolve around waiting for your family to notice you." I picked option 2, not because I had some grand epiphany set to inspiring background music, but because option 1 sounded absolutely miserable and I was already halfway there. The rebuilding started small. I threw myself into my work. I was a data analyst at a mid-sized consulting firm, which sounds boring because it is boring, but I was good at it. Really good. I'd been coasting for years, doing solid work, but never pushing for more because I'd internalized this idea that I was the background character, the steady but unremarkable one. Alara's words kept echoing in my head. Side character. I didn't want to be a side character anymore. I started volunteering for bigger projects. I stayed late, not in a toxic hustle culture way, but in a "I'm finally using the brain I've been sitting on" way. My manager, this sharp woman named Colette, noticed almost immediately. She pulled me into her office one afternoon and said, "Harrison, whatever changed, keep doing it. The Whitfield account analysis you did last week was the best work anyone on this team has produced in 2 years." That felt good, not in a bragging way. In an, "oh right, I'm actually capable of things" way. Around the same time, I started seeing a therapist. Her name was Dr. Inman, and she had this office with a window that overlooked a parking lot, which she once described as a metaphor for how most people view therapy. Not scenic, but functional. I liked her immediately. She helped me untangle something I'd been carrying around for decades without even realizing it. I had spent my entire life defining my value through other people's recognition. Cole's approval, my parents' attention, my role in the family hierarchy. When those things were taken away, I didn't know who I was, because I'd never bothered to figure that out for myself. It sounds simple when I say it like that. It wasn't. It was months of hard conversations and uncomfortable realizations, and the occasional session where I'd leave feeling like someone had rearranged my internal furniture without asking. But it was working. I could feel the difference. Physically, I started running. Nothing crazy, just a few miles a few times a week. At first, I hated every second of it. My lungs burned, my knees protested, and a particularly judgmental squirrel in the park near my apartment seemed to be personally offended by my pace. But I kept going. After a while, it became the part of my day I looked forward to most. Just me and the road and the rhythmic sound of my own breathing reminding me I was alive and capable of forward motion, literally and otherwise. By month 3, I'd been promoted to senior analyst. By month 5, Colette recommended me for a team lead position on a major client engagement. It was a healthcare analytics project worth about $1.2 million, and they wanted me to run the data strategy. Me, the guy who 3 months ago was eating cold burritos alone in the dark. I also started dating. Nothing serious at first. Alara set me up with a friend of a friend named Waverly, who turned out to be completely wrong for me, but was a fantastic dinner companion. So we became friends instead. Then I met someone on my own. Her name was Thea. She was an urban planner who I met at a coffee shop when we both reached for the last blueberry muffin, and she said, "I'll arm wrestle you for it." I let her have it. She bought me a coffee to compensate, and we talked for 2 hours about city infrastructure, which I know sounds incredibly dull, but she made it sound like the most fascinating thing in the world. Thea was different from anyone I'd dated before. She was direct but kind. She asked real questions and actually listened to the answers. On our third date, she said, "Tell me something about yourself that you usually keep hidden," and I told her the wedding story. All of it. She didn't look at me with pity. She looked at me with something closer to recognition, like she understood what it felt like to be the person in the room who nobody turns to look at. "That must have been incredibly lonely," she said. "Yeah," I said. "It was." "Well," she said, reaching across the table and putting her hand on mine, "you're not at table 14 anymore." I could have proposed to her right then, but I figured the third date was probably too soon, and also we hadn't even gotten our appetizers yet. 6 months after the wedding, I was a different person. Not unrecognizably different. Still Harrison, still quiet, still a little awkward, still unreasonably good at math. But I was standing straighter. I was taking up space. I was the lead on a major project. I was in a relationship with someone who saw me, actually saw me, and I had a therapist who was systematically dismantling every lie I'd ever told myself about not being enough. And then, because life has a sense of timing that borders on theatrical, Cole called. I almost didn't pick up. I was sitting on Thea's couch on a Sunday afternoon, half watching a documentary about bridges that she was genuinely riveted by, and my phone lit up with Cole's name. I hadn't spoken to him in 6 months, hadn't responded to a single text. The silence between us had grown from awkward to enormous, and I'd made peace with it. Or at least I thought I had. Thea looked at the screen, then at me. "You don't have to answer that." "I know," I said. And then I answered it anyway, because apparently 6 months of therapy still can't fully override 32 years of being the brother who shows up. "Harrison." Cole's voice was different. Smaller, somehow. Less golden. "Hey, I know it's been a while." "Yeah," I said. "It has." There was a pause. The kind of pause where you can hear someone gathering the courage to say something they've been rehearsing. "I need to talk to you about something. Can we meet up?" Every instinct I developed over the last 6 months told me to say no. Dr. Inman's voice was in my head saying, "You don't owe anyone access to you just because they share your DNA." Alara's voice was in there too, less clinical and more along the lines of, "If you go to that meeting without a backbone, I will personally come to your house and rearrange your bookshelf out of alphabetical order." Which, for the record, is the most terrifying threat anyone has ever made to me. But I said yes. Not because I was falling back into old patterns, because I was curious, and because I wanted to see if the new version of Harrison could sit across from his brother and not shrink. We met at a diner halfway between our apartments. One of those places with sticky menus and coffee that tastes like it was brewed during the previous administration. Cole was already there when I arrived, sitting in a booth near the window, and he looked rough. Not sick, just worn, like the shine had dulled. I sat down across from him and waited. I didn't fill the silence. That was new for me. Old Harrison would have immediately started making things comfortable, asking questions, smoothing edges. New Harrison just sat there and let the discomfort exist. "Thanks for coming," Cole said. I nodded. He took a breath. "So, a few things have happened. Prescott and I aren't friends anymore. He got fired from the firm about 2 months ago. Turns out he'd been inflating his numbers on client reports for about a year. When it came out, it was a whole mess. The company almost lost a major account, and when they investigated, some of the stuff had Prescott's fingerprints, but my name attached because we'd been collaborating on the same projects." I raised an eyebrow. "So you got in trouble too?" "Not officially, but my reputation took a hit. My boss pulled me aside and basically said I needed to be more careful about who I associate with," which was humiliating. I took a sip of the terrible coffee and said nothing. Cole continued. "And things with Sutton have been, I don't know, complicated. We've been arguing a lot. About money, about priorities. She wants to buy a house, and I want to wait. And every conversation about it turns into a fight. She keeps saying I don't take things seriously enough, that I coast through everything." I almost laughed at the irony, but I held it together. Sutton was using the exact same criticism about Cole that I'd swallowed my entire life. He coasted. He'd always coasted. And people like me had been the engines underneath him, doing the actual work while he smiled, and collected the credit. And then there's Mom and Dad, he said. Mom told me you haven't been to a family dinner in 6 months. Dad's worried. They keep asking me what happened between us. And what do you tell them? He hesitated. I tell them I don't know. You don't know? I repeated. Harrison, come on. I know you're upset about the wedding stuff. But it was one day. It was just a role change. I didn't think it was that big a deal. I set my coffee cup down. Slowly. Deliberately. And I looked my brother in the eye in a way I don't think I ever had before. It wasn't one day, Cole. It was 32 years of one day. It was every time I got moved aside so you could have the spotlight. Every time I was told not to make it a thing. Every time I showed up for you. Every single time. And you didn't even notice. The wedding wasn't the problem. The wedding was just when I finally stopped pretending it didn't hurt. He stared at me. I don't think anyone had ever spoken to him like that. Certainly not me. I wrote you a speech, I said, and my voice was steady, which surprised even me. I worked on it for 6 months. I called your college roommate. I dug through old photos. I put my entire heart into it. And you replaced me with a guy who told a printer jam story and called marriage a group project. And then you sat me at a table behind a column with people who didn't know my name. At your wedding, Cole. Your brother. At your wedding. The diner was quiet except for the clink of dishes in the kitchen. Cole's eyes were wet. I didn't realize, he started. That's the problem. You never realize. Because you've never had to. We sat there in silence for a while. It wasn't comfortable, and it wasn't supposed to be. I wasn't there to make him feel better. I was there to tell the truth, maybe for the first time in my life, and let him sit with it. Eventually, Cole said, "What do you want me to do?" I thought about it. Really thought about it. Not the reflexive, "it's fine, don't worry about it," that had been my default setting since childhood. "I want you to understand what you did," I said. "Not just the wedding. All of it. I want you to stop treating me like an accessory to your life. And I want you to tell Mom and Dad the truth about why I haven't been around. Not some vague, I don't know. The truth." He swallowed hard. "And if I do all that, then we'll see. I'm not making any promises, Cole. I spent my whole life making things easy for you. I'm done with that." I put a $10 bill on the table for the coffee and stood up. He looked up at me, and for the first time in maybe ever, I saw something in his eyes that wasn't confidence or charm or the easy assurance of someone who'd always been the favorite. It was fear. Fear that he might have actually lost something he couldn't get back. Good. I walked out of that diner and called Alara from my car. "How'd it go?" she asked. "I didn't shrink," I said. "That's my guy," she said, and I could hear her smiling through the phone. That night, Thea and I sat on her balcony, and I told her everything. About the diner, about what I'd said, about how it felt to finally stand up to the person I'd spent my whole life standing behind. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Terrified," I said, "and also kind of amazing." She leaned her head on my shoulder. That's usually how the important stuff feels. Over the next few weeks, I heard from my mom. She called twice. The first time she left a voicemail that was mostly confusion. "Cole told us some things, and your father and I are very upset. I don't understand why you couldn't have just talked to us." The second time I picked up, and we had a real conversation. It wasn't easy. She got defensive. She said I was being dramatic. She said Cole didn't mean any harm. And I said, calmly and clearly, "Mom, I need you to hear what I'm saying instead of explaining it away." She went quiet. Then she said, "When did you get so direct?" "When I had to," I said. "My dad called separately. He was quieter about it, the way he's always been. But he said something that surprised me. 'I think your mother and I could have done better by you, Harrison. I don't think we realized how much of the weight you were carrying.' It wasn't a full apology, but it was a start. And starts were more than I'd gotten in 3 decades. Meanwhile, at work, the healthcare project was going phenomenally. My team delivered the preliminary analysis ahead of schedule, and the client was thrilled. Colette pulled me aside and said there was talk of creating a new director-level position and that my name was at the top of the list. Everything I'd built in the last 6 months was standing on solid ground, and I was standing on solid ground with it. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for someone else to tell me I mattered. I already knew. About 2 months after the diner conversation, my mom called and asked if I'd come to a family dinner. Not a holiday, not a birthday, just a dinner. She said Cole and Sutton would be there. She said she and Dad had been doing a lot of talking. She said, and this is a direct quote, "We want to try to do this differently." I talked it over with Thea and Dr. Inman separately. Thea said, "Go if you want to, not because you feel obligated." Dr. Inman said. This is an opportunity to practice holding your boundaries in the environment where you first learned to abandon them. I went. I drove to my parents' house on a Saturday evening with Thea in the passenger seat. We pulled into the driveway, and I sat there for a moment looking at the house I grew up in. Same brick facade, same crooked mailbox my dad had been meaning to fix since I was in high school. Same front porch where I'd spent 1,000 hours reading books while Cole played in the yard with friends. Inside, the table was set for 6. Mom had made pot roast, which was her go-to for occasions that felt significant but didn't have a specific name. Dad was in his usual chair. Cole and Sutton were already there. Sutton gave me a hug that felt slightly too tight, like she was trying to communicate something through sheer arm pressure. Cole stood up and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen on him before. Uncertainty. "Hey, Harrison," he said. "Hey, Cole." Thea introduced herself and immediately won my mother over by complimenting the pot roast before she'd even tasted it, which is the kind of social genius that I will never possess but deeply admire. Dinner started awkwardly, the way these things always do when there's an elephant in the room and the elephant is wearing a tuxedo made of years of unresolved family dynamics. We talked about safe topics for a while. The weather, my dad's golf game, Sutton's work. Then my mom, who has never been accused of subtlety, set down her fork and said, "I think we should talk about what's been going on." I appreciated the directness, even if my stomach clenched. Cole spoke first. He looked at me across the table, and what came out wasn't polished or rehearsed. It was halting and uncomfortable and real in a way I'd never heard from him before. "Harrison, I owe you a real apology. Not just for the wedding, for all of it. I've been thinking about what you said at the diner, and you were right. I've spent my whole life taking you for granted. You were always there, always showing up, always making things easier for me, and I never once stopped to think about what that cost you. I replaced you as best man because Prescott was new and exciting, and I got caught up in the attention. And Sutton," he glanced at her, "Sutton told me it would be fine, and I chose to believe that because it was easier than dealing with the guilt of what I was actually doing." Sutton shifted in her seat. "I want to own my part in that too," she said, looking at me. I pushed for the change. I thought Prescott's speech would be more polished, more entertaining. I was thinking about the wedding like a production instead of thinking about you as a person. As Cole's brother. That was wrong, and I'm sorry. I sat there absorbing it. Part of me wanted to immediately say it was fine, to smooth it over, to be the easy Harrison everyone was used to. But I didn't. I let their words land. I let the silence sit. "Thank you," I said finally. "Both of you. That means something to me." My mom cleared her throat. She looked at my dad, and he gave her a small nod. "Harrison," she said, and her voice cracked. "Your father and I have been talking a lot since you and Cole had your conversation. And I need to admit something. We leaned on you to be the responsible one, the easy one, the one who didn't need attention. And we told ourselves that was just your personality. But the truth is we made that your role because it was convenient. It let us focus on Cole because he was louder, and louder isn't the same as more important. I'm sorry, sweetheart." My dad, a man of famously few words, added, "You deserved better from us, son. I'm proud of the man you've become, and I should have told you that a long time ago. I'm not going to pretend I didn't get emotional. I did." Thea's hand found mine under the table, and she squeezed it, and I held on like it was the only thing keeping me from floating away. "I appreciate all of this," I said, once I trusted my voice. "I'm not going to pretend everything is fixed because one dinner doesn't undo 32 years. But this is a real start, and I want you to know something. I didn't pull away because I stopped loving this family. I pulled away because loving this family was costing me too much and nobody noticed. Nobody argued with that. Nobody deflected. Nobody said don't make it a thing. They just heard it. After dinner, Cole and I ended up on the front porch. Just the two of us, the night air cool, crickets doing their thing, and the crooked mailbox still crooked. I read the speech, Cole said quietly. I looked at him. "What?" "I found it. You left a copy in the groomsmen's dressing room. The venue coordinator sent it to Sutton with some leftover stuff. I read it about a month ago. It was incredible, Harrison. The raccoon story, the thing about me being scared to call mom and dad from that party, the line about how a best man isn't just a title, it's a promise. I read it, and I sat in my car and cried like a complete idiot for about 20 minutes. Well, I said, at least somebody cried over it. I was kind of banking on that being the audience reaction. He laughed. It was a real laugh, not his charming public laugh. The real one, the one that sounds slightly like a hiccup and that I hadn't heard in years. "I don't deserve to ask this," he said. "But do you think, maybe someday, you'd give that speech? Not at an event or anything. Just maybe read it to me. When you're ready." I thought about it. "Maybe," I said. "Someday. When I'm ready." He nodded. He didn't push. That was new. We went back inside and had dessert, and it was the most normal and simultaneously the most significant family gathering I'd ever attended. Nothing was fixed completely, but the cracks were visible now, and visible cracks are the ones you can actually repair. 3 months later, Colette officially offered me the director position. I accepted. Thea took me out to celebrate, and when she raised her glass, she said, "To Harrison, the main character," which is funny because Alara sent me a card that same week that said the exact same thing. I put it on my desk at work where I can see it every day. Cole and I aren't where we used to be. We might never be, but we're somewhere new, and somewhere new is better than somewhere fake. He calls me every couple of weeks now. Real calls, not performative ones. He asks about my work, about Thea, about my life, and he actually listens. He's going to therapy too, which I found out not because he told me directly, but because my mom mentioned it with the same tone of wonder she'd use if she saw a dog driving a car. My parents are trying. My dad sends me articles about data analytics that he clearly doesn't understand, but finds anyway because he wants to show interest. My mom invited Thea to her book club, which Thea described afterward as beautiful chaos with wine. As for Prescott, I heard through the grapevine that he's selling insurance now. I don't wish him any ill will. He was a symptom, not the disease. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel a small, petty flicker of satisfaction when I heard that. I still have the speech. It's in my desk drawer at home, a little wrinkled, a little coffee-stained from the rehearsal dinner. I'll read it to Cole someday. Not because he earned it, because I wrote it with love, and I don't want love to go to waste, even when the person it was meant for took a while to deserve it. My name is Harrison. I'm 33 now. I'm a director at a consulting firm. I'm in love with a woman who arm wrestled me for a muffin, and I have a therapist who compares her office view to the public perception of mental health care. I spent most of my life being the person in the room nobody looked at, the reliable one, the quiet one, the one at table 14. I'm not at table 14 anymore, and I never will be again.